mind doing. There's nothing particularly brilliant in what I just wrote, or said, or read, whichever I did. There's nothing particularly brilliant in it, because I'm only restating what the situation was in America in 1790. I'm just reaffirming. You know, Scripture constantly says, and there grew up a generation after Moses who remembered not the great works of the Lord on behalf of Israel, and they followed after Baal. We forgot our history, our traditions. We forgot our forefathers. I mean, I can remember growing up in grade school, having to memorize the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. I don't know any kid in public schools today that's ever had to memorize that. And we forgot Liberty Day. Liberty Day used to be an institution practiced across this country every April 18th. The day that Paul made his famous ride. We forgot the tradition of the fathers. And where we didn't quite forget it all, we made up the difference. And we didn't protect our history any more than the Hebrews did, and any more than other Christians over the last 2,000 years. Dr. Rushdie has a great deal to say about the question of history and how all non-Christian thought and non-Christian civilizations quite naturally fall into revisionism, and history becomes irrelevant because their system of thought is concerned only with the present and only with the self. Thus, there is no point in passing on a valid record for the future because there isn't going to be any beyond my needs. He goes through a big long analysis of the thing, you know, cites Plato and Aristotle and Empedocles and Immanuel Kant, his noumenon phenomena, you know, and Hegel's phenomenology, and Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and all these people, and he finally comes down to the last paragraph and he says, non-Christian man's looking out only for himself. He doesn't care about tomorrow. Unless it means he can steal from somebody and protect himself at the expense of everyone else. And that's the price you pay when you give up your history and your traditions and you let somebody else do it. Now, and this next one here is important because recently federal judges of these United States had the source of their emoluments changed from that of the constitutional source to the United Nations Commissioner. Let me be very clear about this. All federal judges in the United States are currently paid by the United Nations Commissioner, not by the people of these United States. All right? Am I very clear, people? Does everyone understand? New World Order is already here. All right? The federal judges of these United States are no longer paid by the people of the United States. They are paid by the UN Commissioner, just as the Secretary Treasury of these United States is not paid by the people of the United States. He is reimbursed by the International Monetary Fund. Why? Because he sits as governor of the fund and of the bank, the World Bank. Now, think about that carefully, people. The Secretary of the Treasury isn't paid by us. Where is his allegiance? The judges aren't paid by us. Where are their allegiance? Thus, as part of our agenda, judges of courts of common pleas shall be compensated by counties at a salary equal to that of the highest judge in any county. However, no such judge shall, at the time of his appointment, belong to any bar or similar association. And no member of any association shall have any standing in a court of common pleas. Now, is that new? Has Quade come up with something brilliant here? No, I haven't. Read Aladasks. newsletter. Because therein he's talking about some gentlemen back east who, I guess you could say on one hand they stumbled on, and on the other hand it was by God's providence that they happened to discover the fact that there was another 13th Amendment. And that 13th Amendment prohibited titles of nobility. Now, how did titles of nobility come up in American law 40 years after, or 32 years after the Constitution is signed? Because a bar association, and a bar association alone, has the right to convey the title attorney at law. And it goes to only those who pass the bar examination, who will become effective members thereof, etc. Now, there's about 12 court cases which establish the fact that at law, though not in equity, at law, that's a title of nobility. The original 13th Amendment that these researchers have turned up, it turns out that 12 of the 13 states necessary at the time passed this amendment, a 13th Amendment, against titles of nobility. They said, but Virginia didn't do it. Well, see, there was a problem because the records in the state of Virginia were destroyed by fire. But the state of Virginia published an official codification of its laws after the fire and included the 13th Amendment against titles of nobility. Now, 13 of 18 states ratified it, yet the 13th Amendment against titles of nobility does not appear in any edition of the Constitution after 1854. And yet there are more than 200 sources of published books by state legislatures, by the United States government, by private publishers, which show a 13th Amendment against titles of nobility. Books that were published between 1820 and 1854. Turns out that I bought at a book sale several boxes of books, old books, I'm always doing that, went home, sorted through them and everything else, and I gave a couple of stacks of them to my son John, you know. And he says, hey Dad, here's a school book on constitutional, it's a catechism on the Constitution that was used in the schools in 1832. And I said, yeah, son, great. I was working on my own stuff. I had my own treasures here. I wasn't paying attention to what he said, right? And he goes on, he's reading about the 13th Amendment and everything else, and I didn't read it. I wasn't paid time out of it here. You know, 2 years later, I'm sitting down, I'm reading Aladask's newsletter, you know, and I said, whoa, wait a minute. And John says, he was sitting across the table, see? And he says, what are you reading, Dad? I said, these people here are talking about a 13th Amendment against titles of nobility, which is somehow or another missing from all late editions of the Constitution. And he says, oh, yeah, Dad, everybody knows about that. And I said, what are you talking about everybody knows about that? And he said, Dad, don't you remember a couple of years ago when you gave me that catechism on the Constitution for the schools in 1832? I was reading the 13th Amendment to you. That's, wait a minute, you mean to tell me in my own house I got a copy of a book published in 1832 with a 13th Amendment against titles of nobility? How did that happen? And he says, you weren't listening, Dad. I mean, you could have walked up and hit me between the eyes with a club. Here's a textbook, a catechism, with a 13th Amendment against titles of nobility. Now, why is this ding-dong Quade standing up here raving about titles of nobility and everything else? What does it have to do with anything? What it means, people, in that amendment, it says persons receiving titles of nobility not only may not hold any office of profit or trust in any branch of the United States government, they are also stripped of all citizenship rights.